You'll recognize the entranceway there going back down to the ford. But we're going to stop here for a moment before we going to turn back around and emulate a little bit of the advance of Hood's Brigade, although we're starting a little further south of things. But for the sake of time and walking distance, we'll start here. Now to begin with, just a little bit about the situation. As everything was almost, this events here are going to start almost simultaneously with those that occur with A.P. Stewart's attack, with the men moving up the road. Late in the afternoon of the 20th, the majority of the Army of the Cumberland has been brought here to the field and committed into action. Now, late in the afternoon, more troops are still being filed up from the Lafayette Road, and about this time in the afternoon of November 19th, up the road coming up from near Leangorn's Mill is the division of the Indianan by the name of Jefferson C. Davis. No relation to the Confederate president. Jefferson C. Davis is a pariah of many sorts within the Army of the Cumberland. Jefferson C. Davis had gotten his promotion to command under rather dubious circumstances. Those dubious circumstances being that he murdered a fellow Union officer by the name of William Bull Nelson in the lobby of a Louisville hotel room the previous year. Now, he had been arrested, brought up on charges, but there happened to be an emergency going on in Kentucky at that time. Bragg's invasion of the state. So, he was given a temporary release to go serve in the action, and he never saw the inside of a courtroom after that, or a jail cell. Add a little more salt in the wounds of that whole situation, there was a vacancy in the division command of the Union Army at that time, created by the death of one of its officers, Bull Nelson. And he filled that position. So he got the command of the man he murdered. Needless to say, the brigade commanders of that group don't think very highly of him. It also doesn't help things that he is a really outspoken Democrat who is very anti-abolitionist. And that doesn't help when you've got Colonel Hans Haig, who is a very outspoken abolitionist from Wisconsin, as one of your brigade commanders. And William Passmore Carlin, another one of the brigade commanders, is also a very staunch abolitionist. So doesn't make the best command harmony that you're going to see on the field. So as they're trudging up the dusty Lafayette Road 150 years ago this afternoon, it's not a perfect command. Especially not a command that's going to be suited for what they're about to be hit with. As they come up the Lafayette Road, close to where we turn to come over here to what they call the Little Vineyard Field, just north of that, his lead brigade, Colonel Hans Christian Haig's command, Haig, Norwegian by birth, had commanded a brigade, a regiment, the 15th Wisconsin, who was company. Many of you all know that some of the really colorful company names that units had when they marched off to war. You know, you got like the Chateau County Lincoln Killers here in the South, or so-and-so Blues, so-and-so Rifles, the Dixie Plowboys being one group in the South. Well, these Norwegians also pulled in some of their own company names. One of the companies being known as Odin's Wolfhounds. And on their flag, their national colors is emblazoned in Norwegian for God, for good, or God. So they're, the language of most of the men is Norwegian or some other Scandinavian dialect, and the most common name of the soldiers in the 15th Wisconsin is the name Ole Olensen. So not your typical Civil War soldiers in that group. They also have another unique regiment in that brigade, the 8th Kansas. Well, people say, well, what's so unique about Kansas? Anybody here ever really think that Kansas had troops in the Civil War? A lot of people don't. But the 8th Kansas is the only infantry regiment that is from Kansas that is going to serve on the east side of the Mississippi River for any length of time. And then throw in some Illinois soldiers, and you've got the makeup of Haig's Brigade. They're going to move up the Dusty Lafayette Road. They're going to get there around the little log schoolhouse. They're going to be halted, fronted, deployed, and move forward. Again, they're trying to find the flank. Just as Van Cleve's division had fronted and came in and struck the flank of Cheatham's division, well, they're trying to search for the flank of the Confederate Army. So Haig's Brigade is going to move into the woods, while William Carlin's brigade is going to deploy along the edge of the Vineyard farmstead and move out into the Vineyard field, moving rather slowly. Haig will not move so slowly. His command moving through some of the thickest woods on the battlefield. Now, people have been asking me all day, how thick were the woods here? Well, down here, the woods were really thick. This is one of the few areas where it was real thick. So they're going to lose some of their alignment as they move through the woods, and they're going to follow basically just the short distance to the north of where we are right now. What they don't know is what they're headed for is the remains of the big block that Braxton Bragg had been trying to build the night before and this morning to make that oh so coveted assault on the Union flank of what had once been the Union flank at Lee and Gordon's Mill. Bushrod Johnson's division, men who had crossed and fought it out Reed's Bridge and had moved into this area on the night of September 18th. And just north of them, the famed division of John Bell Hood, consisting of his old Texas Brigade, commanded by the Jerome Aunt Polly Robertson, the Georgians of Henry Rock Benning, and the Alabamians of Evander Law's Brigade. For any Civil War buff, these names are all well known. These are the same men who fought at the Devil's Den, who fought at Little Round Top, at that little small South Central Pennsylvania college town 11 weeks prior to this engagement. And now, after a long railroad ride, they have arrived here in North Georgia. The lead elements of James Longstreet's big troop transfer from the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, of course, they're spending most of the day on September 19th on this ridgetop. And what were they doing? Well, some of you can see it right behind here. They had entrenched along the top of this ridge running to the north. And headed straight toward this, through that impenetrable wilderness of woods, is Haig's Brigade. And as they're losing their alignment, the 8th Kansas is getting a little ahead of everybody else. Now, the 8th Kansas is also many rough and tumble young officers. This photograph here taken shortly before this campaign began of Captains John Conover and Captain James Graham of Company C. And notice they don't have any airs about them as far as their appearance goes. In the following engagement, Graham will be killed and left upon the field. So this is the last photograph that was ever made of him. Now, most of the time we always imagine soldiers being led forward into action like this by an officer, gallantly leading his men with his sword in hand, and nothing against the colonel of the 8th Kansas, Colonel Martin, but that's not who's leading the 8th Kansas through this impenetrable wilderness. Getting ahead of the men, encouraging the men on, is the regimental mascot, a large black dog by the name of Soldier, who is making his way through this underbrush a lot better than the soldiers can. And as they approach the bottom slope through here, Confederate pickets lounging around, the men not really expecting anything, because where have they been hearing the battle? North. They're lounging around, not prepared for what's going on at all. The only activity they had that day was a few stray artillery shells that had burst in the area. Actually, did a little more than that. One soldier of the 1st Texas had noted that basically the artillery had torn out all the treetops. The Yankee batteries had about topped all the timber. The shells had kept every man as busy as cranberry merchant dodging their flying fragments. We could hear the singing noise of the shells and their frequent crashing in the timber above us. But that's been about the extent of it. No infantry fire, nothing directly in front of them. So they're kind of surprised when they hear barking coming from their front. And even more surprised when a line of blue uniforms appears less than 100 yards away. But no less surprised are those guys in the blue uniforms. They did not expect that this force was in front. But they have awakened a terrible sleeping giant. They are greeted with a massive volley as the Confederates grab their weapons and open fire. Among the dead will be Soldier, that dog that had led the men into battle. Now, things have been stirred up. Haig's brigade has stirred up a hornet's nest. And without much delay, the ever-aggressive John Bell Hood is going to order the commands forward. Bushrod Johnson's division and his are going to now, with a yell, go over their works and pitch in to the brigade of Hans Haig. Haig's brigade will begin a rapid withdrawal back toward the Lafayette Road with these men hot on their heels. Now, the funny thing is they're going to do a rather crisscross. Hood's division had been aligned further to the north on this ridge, while this area here would have been occupied by Bushrod Johnson. But Johnson's going to advance his men in a northwesterly direction, while Hood's command is going to advance in a southwesterly direction. So Johnson moving first, though, to clear the front, and then Hood going in. So they'll be mostly Johnson's men pushing Haig back. Hood's guys are going to come in behind them. So now we're going to kind of emulate that move back toward the Vineyard Field and Lafayette Road. Before we leave here, though, does anyone have any questions about this part of the story? All right.
Yeah, who was in the trenches right here?
Twin troops of Bushrod Johnson's division. Now, we actually could go up to Hood's, but that would take a great deal of time, and then we'd still have to backtrack. So figured we'd start.
How far across is the trench?
Well, it runs quite a considerable distance up through the woods.
What kind of dog did you say it was?
Big black dog. No, I've never seen anything about breed, so probably a mutt. All right. Well, let's follow the text. Hood's division is pretty well beat up, so just in a little neighborhood of a little over 1,000 men. Still haven't recovered from Gettysburg.
Texas Brigade here, we're looking at 300?
No. Oh, anybody got a copy of Dave Powell's book with the numbers in it? 'Cause I actually hadn't been carrying around all day till this tour. All right, thank you. I'm never good with numbers, never was in history, math, and numbers just do not compute. Let's see. The numbers for, well, I'll give you the brigade totals. Benning's Georgia Brigade comes in with 1,200 men. Law's Brigade's 1,400, and Robertson's Brigade's at 1,300. So I was referring to the brigade, but so a little neighborhood of a little over, a little over between 3,000 and 4,000 men in the. Thank you. But at this time, as I mentioned, when Haig's brigade stirs up the proverbial hornet's nest, Bushrod Johnson's men take off, pushing back to the northwest. Robertson's brigade, Benning's brigade are going to come this way. And we really don't know what the heck Law's brigade does, but they end up going north. Part of Law's brigade will end up in Stewart's, part of helping Stewart out in his attack in the center. So something really went wrong there. But it's right in this area here that the Texas Brigade advancing will come to this low area here, and they will halt momentarily to address their lines after having moved through the thick forest. and then they're going to prepare to go up the rise there and in toward where they can hear the gunfire from Haig's men being pushed across. But everything's kind of silent in front, other than the popping of Union skirmishers that noticed them along the rise up there. Hood will be down in this area, riding along, armed still in a sling from his wound at Gettysburg, although he is beginning to regain some basic use of that arm at that time, enough to at least hold the reins. But so directly in this area would have been Jerome Robertson's Texans, and just to the north, and who we'll also talk about a little bit, will be Henry Rock Benning's Georgians. So with that, now that we have reformed as well, we're going to make our way to the lip of the ridge there and into the firefight of Viniard. And actually one of them is nearby. There in the middle of the field would have been a line of blue, William Passmore Carlin's brigade. The Texans are going to get here and they're going to come under fire for the first time here in this part of the field. With the mini balls zipping through their ranks, the Texans are going to begin to advance with their giving the rebel yell and pitching forward toward this position. The line's going to extend further here to the north. The 5th Texas being on the far end. On the far left end will be the 3rd Arkansas, with the 1st and 4th Texas filling in between. Some of the men are going to come under fire of George Estep's battery down there, firing canister into the woods as they emerge, while the rest of them are just going to be pelted with musket fire from the Illinois regiments and Carlin's brigade. But as they go forward here, John C. West, the Company E, 4th Texas, notes that as he was moving forward, he was waving his hat, firing rapidly as he could reload, when a ball struck and shattered his bayonet. And the pieces wounded him in the right hip. Feeling sick and spitting blood, he fell upon the body of a severely wounded Federal soldier, who asked him to unbuckle his belt, which he, of course, begins to try to do, but by the time he was finished, that soldier had already passed away. And within minis and canister flying about, throwing dirt on him, West was able to make his way to the rear. So one soldier dashes in and promptly dashes out wounded. Val Giles, a Company B of the 4th Texas, wrote one of the most quoted memoirs of the Texas Brigade, notes, bombshell struck in the fork of a big red oak tree about 20 feet from the ground and split it wide open. It came crashing down among the men, breaking limbs off the nearby trees and crushing everything in its reach. A large limb from a half of a falling tree struck Captain Bassett on the shoulder and injuring him so badly that he was never able to rejoin his regiment, subsequently died in Texas from the effects of his wound. Giles also noticed that as they were advancing here along the edge of these woods, they saw another soldier loading and firing his weapon up straight in the air. When Lieutenant Killingsworth remonstrated him about it, he paid no attention to him whatsoever. Captain Joe Billingsley threatened to cut him down with his sword if he didn't shoot at the enemy, for the field in front were full of them. He retorted to Captain, "You can kill me if you want to, but I'm not going to appear before God with blood on my fellow man on my soul." So, just some interesting scenes that you would have seen at this point. Meanwhile, off here in the woods, the 5th Texas advances, gets into a firefight driving back. 5th Texas, will note, of all the regiments of the Texas Brigade, takes the fewest losses for some reason throughout both the fighting here on September 20th, or September 19th, and tomorrow on September 20th. They find that when the rest of the brigade's off in the field fighting, they're fighting in the woods. So they're sheltered a little bit better than the rest of the command. But at one point they are ordered to lie down. William Fletcher, and if you've ever read Fletcher's memoirs, he's a colorful character. Not necessarily coming across as the nicest person in the world. And he had actually, when they were ordered to lie down, he fell asleep. Only to be woken up, rudely awakened as he noted a hail of enemy rounds from coming his way. So as they began to advance, he comes across a wounded Federal soldier leaning against a tree that he decides is going to offer him some protection. So yelling, "Victory is ours!" he will shove the wounded Union soldier away from the tree. To the victor belongs the spoils, he noted in his memoir. So the Federal only gave him a groan in reply. And Fletcher, just about things occur for him when Fletcher himself is wounded, and we'll go to the rear. So unfortunately for us, with a lot of the memoirs and good accounts here, too many of these guys are getting shot here. But what's going to happen is they're going to pitch, though, straight into William Carlin's line there in the field is just going to come under such intense pressure that they're going to really find it rough going. Indeed, he is going to note later on of this part of the field that as his line is just struggled continued all the afternoon, the wounded officers and men still streamed to the rear. Lieutenant Colonel J.W. Mosser, 101st Ohio, and Major Henry Alden, 38th Illinois, were wounded in short time after the fight began. About an hour before sundown, I was informed that the horse I was riding was shot through the body, just in rear of the saddle skirts. Still, he carried me often at a gallop from right to left of my line. I determined not to dismount so long as he could move. In all my previous experiences, I had never been so constantly taxed mentally and physically as I was in this struggle. In the effort to hold my position and keep my men in courage and spirit while battling with superior numbers in an inaccessible position. So many of my officers' men had been killed and wounded that my line was not even equivalent to a skirmish line. And of course, some had fallen back without authority or good cause, but not so many. Finally, with the sun setting, this is all occurring late in the afternoon, he's finally going to dismount. Late in the afternoon, he's in the Lafayette Road. Carlin's horse succumbs to its wound and falls to the ground. At that point, William Casimir Carlin breaks down crying over the death of his horse, having seen and everything else attached him so much that one scene. He says, "My poor horse waited for me to dismount when he lay quietly down in the dusty Lafayette Road and died without a struggle. Removing the saddle with the help of one of my men, I seated myself upon it and then gave way to the long hysterical crying spell, which I could do no more have checked than I could have checked the setting of the sun." So things are going to go rough for Carlin's brigade. Brigade takes some tremendous amounts of casualties here in the field, and we'll take one point to point out that one of the soldiers that falls out here, we always have all these individual stories, and you can always tell soldiers have these tragic tales, but one in particular to note, and this I do for an old friend of mine. One of the men to die here was Lieutenant Isaac Rule of the 101st, who was a school teacher before the war. So this is one of those guys, the classical example of the citizen soldier, and he dies right out here 150 years ago this afternoon. But we're going to move down the road a little bit and continue with the Texans as they push closer to the Lafayette Road. Jefferson C. Davis's division at this point, with Hood's men pitching in, driving back Carlin. Here on this part of the field, they're going to push in and drive off the gunners of the 8th Indiana Battery, swarming among the guns, shooting, bayonet many of them. They're also going to capture and shoot down, in some cases, many soldiers here at this corner, as the large fence that surrounded the field was still in place in that area, and the men were unable to escape by climbing over the fence. And so with the Texans swarming down on them, many of them will fall or be captured at this spot. However, just as this critical moment's being reached, rushing up the Lafayette Road comes the division of Thomas J. Wood, ordered up from Lee and Gordon's mill. Woods being led by the brigade of 26-year-old Charles Garrison Harker. Deploying south here, they're going to come sweeping in through here, and they're going to drive the Texans back across the back into the woods, where they will rally again and will pitch back into the fight again. But this is going to be a seesaw fight for a little bit before, again, they are able to drive in and collapse the line. The Texans will eventually push through here, push over the fat road, and make it into the outbuildings and the home of Tabler Vineyard. However, at that point, they're going to be stopped cold by a force of troops on the far side of the woods there. If you all will look over there, you see the woods there in the distance, occupied by the brigade of Colonel John Wilders and his Lightning Brigade, armed with their Spencer repeating rifles. And as the Texans make it to that area around the Vineyard farmstead, Wilder's going to open up with those Spencers. And this is going to cause one of two things to happen. Many of the Texans are going to bolt for the rear, for the safety of the woods. Others will be called in and among the buildings where they'll have to stay till they can break away. Or others are going to run forward down slope toward a drainage ditch to try to find cover. And they'll be joined very soon by another group of soldiers from their own side. And there we're going to make our way up a little bit to the north and talk about them, that being Benning's Georgia Brigade. So does anybody have any questions about this phase of the fight here and of the fighting done here by Robertson's Texas Brigade?
Where was the ditch
I had
at?
the impression I did until this was probably bloody.
This indeed is considered to be some of the bloodiest fighting of the Battle of Chickamauga. Per square foot of ground, this is probably the bloodiest because it just seesaws back and forth. First you got Davis here, he gets driven back. Then you have Woodsmith come in, some of them get driven back. Then Philip Sheridan's division is going to pitch in to try to clear this area toward the end. They're going to be driven back. And then of course Wilder's brigade inflicting the casualties it is. So this is just a nasty seesaw back and forth, back and forth. In a lot of ways you can make some parallels between this and the cornfield at Antietam.
Where was Trigg?
Trigg is going to advance to the wood line on the far western edge of the field, and it's going to be pretty much a long-range contest with them. They're never going to pitch in with the hand-to-hand fighting and so forth like what was going on with the Texans.
What were the Texans casualties? What were the Texans casualties?
Ultimately, let's see, I don't think I've seen a breakdown. Like so many of these others, they're taking their casualty reports are almost all lumped together for both the fighting on September 18th, fighting on September 19th, and the fighting on September 20th. But they indeed had to have been fairly severe by all the accounts.
Where's the drainage ditch?
Right across the road there.
Yeah,
we're very, very close. We'll see it here in just a moment. But
did you see it from here until you dropped
yes,
it down the road?
you could have seen it from here. When they raised the road up, it obscured that downward slope. The road, of course, is much higher now than it would have been in 1863. Okay, we're going to make our way a little bit further to the north. We'll address Benning's brigade there, and their move into the ditch of death. The far left end of Henry Benning's Georgia Brigade. Beyond this, just a short distance to the left, you would have also had the 5th Texas, as I mentioned, being sheltered in the woods as they push forward. Benning's men here are going to be the coup de grace for Hans Hegg's brigade. Having endured so much, having been pushed back steadily through the marshy ground back here, through these woods by first Bushrod Johnson and then being struck by Benning, it's at this point that they're going to reach the breaking point. And the line is going to, Hegg's brigade is going to shatter and go streaming to the rear. As they race across the dusty Lafayette Road, Hans Hegg is riding amongst his men, trying desperately to rally them when he will be shot in the stomach near the ditch and fall from his horse. And he'll be carried to the rear to field hospital down at Crawfish Springs at the Gordon Lee Mansion, and he will die that night from that wound. Several severe hand-to-hand engagements will occur in these woods, most notably just a short distance to our right in front, or my front, would have been at the time a little log schoolhouse. And in that schoolhouse had taken some shelter of some Federal soldiers, and as the Confederates stream around the house, these men are still present. They will have to be cleared out of that house by the point of the bayonet. Some of the severe hand-to-hand fighting occurs in that house as these Confederate troops surge through the area, pushing them back toward the ditch. And it's in here then that under all this pressure, Hegg's men are gone, nothing really presenting a obstacle in their front, that with a shout, Benning's Georgians are going to surge forward, surge over the Lafayette Road and into the little bit of woods between here and the drainage ditch. And then that's at the same time Wilder's command is going to open fire. And then those men are going to go into cover, whatever cover they can find in that ditch. And we'll move back now a little ways so we can see that ditch a little bit better. But this kind of puts things in a little better context up here. Anybody got any questions at this point? Yes, sir.
The 15th on the left side, are the other markers in the woods up through there for the other edge?
They're going to be in a straight line. You'll see there's going to be one at the edge of the woods, one and then two across the road for when they're sweeping through here at this angle. But this is a good thing. I was talking about how they were advancing at this angle. This helps line that up here on the field. Okay? Well, folks, we'll move back across. Sorry that everybody's just getting comfortable. And then just to point out, for everybody can see it down here, if you'll look off, you can see the stack of cannonballs. That marks the spot where Colonel Hegg was shot down. It's just also that's the point where the ditch is as well. So this is one vantage point where y'all can get a good view of it from here without having to go across the road. We'll move on down. You can also see a monument there for one of Wilder's units. The Georgians fell into the ditch, joining the Texans that had made their way across earlier. The men are going to be pinned down by these just sheets of fire that are being thrown over them by Wilder's men. Men unable to retreat, unable to really put up much of a fight down there. Wilder, knowing that they're there, will order Captain Eli Lilly to take a section of his guns from the 18th Indiana Battery and move them up to a point to the northwest where they can fire down the length of this ditch. And as the account goes, Captain Lilly moved forward 2 guns on the left to a position where he could take the ditch from end to end, opened up out with terrible charges of canister down the ditch, which compelled the rebels to retreat in confusion. The ditch was literally full of dead and wounded and proved to be a self-made grave for hundreds of men, so one account goes. And of course then there's also often made of account where Wilder states that it seemed a pity to kill men so. Well, of course, that's a product of many years of being the mayor of Chattanooga and living in the South, because on September 19th, 1863, I guarantee you he had no compulsion about ordering this fire down the length of that ditch. And not a pity at all in his mind to take out as many of these Confederates that were opposing him here on this afternoon. But with that, the brigade, the Texas Brigade, Benning's Brigade are going to be putting in their final actions here on September 19th. Benning's Brigade is absolutely wrecked by the casualties that they suffer in this engagement and will fall back to the cover of the woods. Robertson's men will also, having expended themselves fighting among the farmstead, fighting out in the open vineyard field, will also be drawn out. And after this fighting finally dies down in here, quiet in the military sense is going to fall over this part of the battlefield. Soldiers on both sides, though, will recall how throughout the night the screaming and cries of the wounded from this area are just going to be so loud and dominating. One soldier will later state that he could have walked from one end of the field to the other, never stepping on the ground. Literally the field being carpeted with dead and wounded soldiers after this engagement had ended. This is also one point to calling the critical nature of this. Hood had came very close to taking and cutting the Lafayette Road at this point. Now, although the majority of the Union Army is north of here, this is another missed opportunity for the Confederates. Because if they had pressed on, cut the road here, they would have knocked out a couple of divisions worth of Union troops that were to the south. However, again, these troops here are not supported, and the fighting will draw to an uneven conclusion as this finally sunset starts to dominate shadow over the battlefield. And this will be the southernmost point of which combat will reach here on the Chickamauga battlefield on September 19th. And the fighting for the most part is going to die down except for one more final flare-up of fighting up at Winfrey Field, close to where it all started that morning. So we're going to now make our way back to the parking area. Does anyone have any questions about the engagement here? Yes, sir.
Were the Federals able to fire down the length of the ditch?
Yes.
And
the artillery was.
And how were they doing that from?
They swung around to the north.
Okay.
And began to just fire down the length of it.
Is there a marker there? Is this a wilder section?
Yes, there are two guns.
Is there